Good afternoon, everybody, and greetings from Geneva. It's Tony Consul, the head of communications here at IATA. I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Sebastian Mikosz, who's our senior vice president for member and external relations, as well as Michael Gill, who's the IATA director for aviation environment, as well as the executive director of the Air Transport Action Group, which encompasses not only IATA, but the broader industry. So we've got great representation here to talk to us about one of the key and critical topics for aviation, which is environment. For those of you who were following yesterday, we had some very important resolutions passed at the AGM, one of which recommitted aviation to its climate change goals and also had us looking even beyond that. So my colleagues will take us through that story. And as usual, we will be taking questions following the presentation. Questions will be taken via the chat function, so please get your questions ready. In the meantime, I'll hand over to Sebastian and Michael.
Thank you, Tony. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to every one of you. It's a pleasure to share with you a few remarks about our environment portfolio and our environment actions after yesterday's AGM. We have a few slides to introduce you today to the topics which were discussed not only by the AGM but also by the Board of Governors, who happened 2 days before. The AGM happened on Monday, to be specific. And we will walk you through this, and then of course we'll be here with Michael to take questions. If we could go to the first slide. Thank you. So I'll just briefly put the context and environmental targets. Then I'll ask Michael to speak about the aviation carbon exchange, the specific product we are launching, and we already launched yesterday to offset carbon emissions. But let me maybe make a few more general statements in the beginning, and then of course we will say a few words more about the aviation carbon exchange. So if you could go to the next one. Thank you. So I would like to start with just sharing with you this graph to underline that the topic of environment has been tackled by IATA since really many years already. So we did not start looking after environment just a few days ago. It's a broad portfolio with quite a number of activities related not only to the CO2 emissions, which of course have are being followed very closely, but we have been involved in, as you can see, in things like emission standards, wildlife protection, sustainable fuels, which we'll mention later, but also single plastic usage programs, just to limit or even eliminate single plastic used equipment from on board of the cabins. We have been here starting to look more and more intensely with what I consider being a really great achievement, which was the launching implementation of CORSIA, which is today the largest international scheme to reduce CO2 impact in civil aviation. So that was to underline that we also had already targets that we achieved, like the target of improving average fuel efficiency, which you see here as examples of achievement. So again, the message that I would really like to insist on is that we didn't start looking at environment improvements that we as industry could provide with only a few months ago, but many years ago. If we could go to the next slide, please. And as Tony was just mentioning, and this is really an important step for us, or an important symbol for us, which is the resolution taken yesterday by our members to continue our commitment to fight climate change. So the thing I would like to underline is that this resolution has been taken despite the COVID crisis. And, I'll not develop now the impact of this crisis, but it's a broad known fact that this is historically the largest crisis we had since the Second War. It was mentioned yesterday by our DG Alexandre, but also by Karsten, the chairman of IATA, Karsten Spohr, who both presented during the AGM the impact and the negative impact. And of course, we called for opening of borders, but the second resolution approved by the General Assembly has a straightforward continuous commitment to fight climate change. And it pledges that we, the industry, will halve the CO2 emission by 2050 with compared to 2005, and we'll continue exploring pathway to reach zero net emissions, which I'll just explain maybe a little longer. And also the very important part, which is a game changer for us, that we will also say more. It supports the transition to sustainable aviation fuel, to avoid cost-ineffective instruments such as a ticket or carbon taxes. So here, our General Assembly agrees that the best way for us to reduce our CO2 footprint is not to tax us, but to give us the capacity to invest in instruments that we already have that will and we already are partly improving our targets and reducing our emissions. So if we could go to the next slide. So before I go into the details of our commitments, let me just please allow to put it in our CO2 in perspective. Of course, the CO2 emissions are again the most followed measure of impact of airlines on the environment. So therefore, it is really important for us to put this into perspective, and this is why we showed on this slide the breakdown of CO2 emission by source in 2019, so pre-COVID, so when the traffic was really intense, just to show you that our contribution or our CO2 emissions represents 1.9% of the whole humankind CO2 emissions or the activities of us on Earth globally. So we are really not a significant contributor, despite having a perception of a big polluter. So this is why I think it's being very important to remind this at each opportunity that we are committing to reduce and to make efforts, but out of this basis, which is in comparison with other industries, I believe a really low contribution. If we could go further. But again, despite that, we are committed to ambitious targets. So despite this 2%, we already delivered a fuel efficiency improvement by 1.5 per year from 2009 to 2020. I know that we even overpassed a little this target. We committed to carbon neutral growth from 2020 onward, and we have this goal of reduction of our net aviation CO2 emission by 2050 by half relative to 2005 level. It's a 45 years old period, but allow me to explain why it's such a long period. And if we could go to the next slide, please. So we are confident that we can deliver those targets, but let me please allow to show you those two comparisons. We have a really hard challenge to decarbonize the industry, because aviation is really still largely dependent on liquid fuel, and that's the problem which we forget or do not insist enough to explain you. Which is the problem of technology, and which is the problem of gravity versus energy density. We have a situation in which we need to carry with us our source of fuel in the air, and the energy density that is that can respond to that is unfortunately now only in fossil fuel, and thus this long process of shifting into or finding a technology that today doesn't exist. So if you compare with other means of transportation, cars, boats, trains, trucks, they have already the technology available, and it's just a problem of scalability. We still don't have this technology available, because even if we take hydrogen or any other propulsion sources, not only they are costly, but the positive development are still not there. And again, we have to win with gravity while carrying our energy density at very long trips. For long-haul trips, when this is particularly difficult, you may have noticed that we already have some general aviation or volocopter systems. So for urban transportation or short transportation, when energy permits, the decarbonization happens. And last but not least, in our challenges, it's important to also remind that we are airlines. So we are the Association of Airlines, but we are very much dependent on our suppliers, fuel suppliers, but also aircraft manufacturers. We do not design planes, we do not design engines, and we're highly dependent on the availability of this products and availability of this technology that has to be developed by our partners. We call them suppliers, but we are partners in this business, and that very much depends also on their efforts and their capacity to invest in this technology. However, we are optimistic, and we can overcome it, and that's the right part of our slide, which is that first of all, we already improved the CO2 impact. We lowered it by over 50%, and that's very encouraging, because we surpassed the target of short-term fuel improvement efficiency, as well as I was mentioning. So we know the pathways how to go there. And, there are announcements that you might have heard from Airbus, for example, on the hydrogen jet planes. We have lots of efforts done also by Embraer, by Boeing. So there is, as example, Rolls-Royce Trent engine, which is now tested on sustainable aviation fuels. So there are multiple ideas in the industry and multiple efforts to allow us to reach this target, despite the fact that we still believe that after COVID, our industry will be growing, so there will be more and more traffic. Sustainable aviation fuels can be one of our game changers. So allow me to maybe elaborate more on that. If you could go to the next slide. So we consider a sustainable aviation fuel as being the game changer, and the game changer that is available to us now. So I was mentioning you that there's complete decarbonization on the path to decarbonization of the industry has a technical issue. But here we have a fuel which is what we call a drop-in fuel. So it's a fuel that comes from sustainable sources. Particularly now, it's produced from waste, and we can use this fuel right away. So we can use this fuel without adaptation to the aircraft engines, and we can use this fuel with existing infrastructure. The fuel is still being tested, but there were already 300,000 commercial flights with a blend of fossil and sustainable aviation fuel. But there were also tests on full sustainable aviation fuel flights, which has been successful. The feedstock for SAF can meet our aviation needs in 2050. So we have a tool that we can develop, and that it can be a game changer in our industry. But, and there is a but, and if we could go further. This game changer needs policy support, because the cost of SAF is really not competitive now. Depending on how you calculate the price of the fossil barrel, this morning it was $49 Brent, $49. So if you compare to the classic fossil fuel, it's from 2 to 4 times more expensive per ton, due to various factors. First, the supply is not there, and refineries are not providing enough of it. Therefore, we need to break the vicious circle on who's going to come first. We can commit as industry to buy more SAF, but we need more supply available worldwide, which means that refinery needs more investment. So we need to enter into this, not enter, actually break this vicious circle and use this crisis to push and promote the policies needed to lower the cost of sustainable fuel. As you know, for airlines, fuel is by far the largest part of their costs. Therefore, airlines cannot afford now just to shift to sustainable fuel on a broader scale more than the 2% we committed. But also because even if this decision have been taken, it's impossible because there is not enough supply. So we have a situation in which it's a technology that is available, that has been tested, that is what we call a drop-in technology, so ready to use, but the supply is not there. So our target and our ambition as IATA is now to really use again the COVID crisis to promote SAF and to ask governments to have regulatory support of lowering the cost of sustainable fuel, and therefore airlines will be much quicker to commit to that and will be much quicker to shift and to expand the usage of SAF in their everyday operations, which of course will have a hugely beneficial impact on the lowering of CO2. If we could go further. And again, this is what we are calling for. We are calling for governments to help investments in SAF, not ticket or carbon taxes. So we insist on that because there is a maybe perception or a conviction which is completely false that if tickets are taxed, then airlines will be more incentivized to quicker invest in alternative means. Actually, this money will just go to government and will not improve the CO2 emissions. So they will not be efficient because maybe some customers will fly less because the ticket prices will go up. But mostly the investment will not be faster because airline will not have enough customers. Therefore, they will not have enough financial means to invest and to support the investments and the commitments into sustainable fuel. And we need also to think that, again, it has to be a solution to sustainable long-haul travel, and long-haul aviation has to be able to rely on this. And as you know, it's the biggest cost because the biggest usage of fuel. We believe also that the economic impact of developing SAF will create jobs and boost economy, and the first movers countries will have the biggest benefit from it. This is why we have this plan on pushing governments, calling governments, advocating for governments to help the petrol industry and also the airlines to shift to sustainable fuel as a priority in available technologies to decarbonize our industry. That would be it from me. We launched today the Aviation Carbon Exchange, which is a specific tool for offsetting CO2. And I'll ask Michael Gill to present you this platform as he's running this project since the very beginning in IATA. Michael, please, over to you.
Thank you, Sebastian, and good afternoon to everyone from Geneva. Just to turn the spotlight for a few moments on the issue of offsetting, and in particular the operational launch of the IATA Aviation Carbon Exchange, or ACE. As Sebastian noted, offsetting is one of the fundamental pillars of our overall broader emissions reduction strategy. The reason being that we need offsetting as a short-term gap filler mechanism to allow us to stabilize our net CO2 emissions at 2020 levels, whilst aircraft technology and sustainable aviation fuels are able to ramp up and really deploy their full effect. So offsetting is a key topic for the airlines and indeed for the broader aviation sector as a fundamental building block of our long-term strategy. And just to take you to onto the next slide, what is the ACE, the Aviation Carbon Exchange? Well, it's a centralized, real-time marketplace, the first of its kind, specifically tailored to the aviation sector. It meets the needs of IATA member airlines and indeed broader industry stakeholders for a reliable tool which will give them rapid market access in order to meet their carbon credit voluntary commitments or regulatory obligations. We've highlighted here what are the key advantages of ACE. Well, from an airline perspective, it makes it easier to source those carbon credits. It gives access to CORSIA certified or voluntary mechanism certified carbon credits as well. ACE is completely integrated with all of the other IATA financial systems, which obviously has a significant administrative and cost benefit as far as the administrative aspects of carbon offsetting are concerned. ACE will be open to all airlines and indeed all aircraft operators, and this eliminates some significant complexity around the whole procurement and purchase process for airlines and other aircraft operators. So the ACE platform brings significant benefits to the industry. Going to the next slide, from an ancillary perspective, ACE also supports fundamentally the overall concept of climate finance. It allows direct market access for project developers in order to get finance for their offset projects. It also enables the financing of many community-based projects, whether those are forestry-based, clean wind-based, protection of ecosystems. It allows for many such community-based projects to be financed, and that really supports the broader UN Sustainable Development Agenda, which the world's governments have called on all industries to support. What I'm delighted to announce today is that JetBlue, the airline of our incoming IATA board chair, Robin Hayes, have made the first trade on the ACE platform. JetBlue purchased some credits in the Larimar wind farm project in the Dominican Republic. By the time that project is complete and up and running, it will reduce around 200,000 tons of CO2 every single year. So we'd like to congratulate JetBlue on this really positive development and congratulate them on their leadership. With a number of other airlines, they are really driving ahead on our overall environmental agenda. And so we'd like to congratulate them on that historic first trade on the ACE platform. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing those informations. Tony, over to you. That would be it in terms of our remarks on environment.
Great, thank you both. We've got a few questions in the queue, so we'll take them in order. The first talks about the request for governments to invest in SAF production. The questioner asks, why not just ask governments to set quotas?
Oh, it's very simple, because if quotas are set, the burden will be only on the airlines. Airlines have no enough supply. So the first thing is not quotas. The first thing is supply. I think that if we incentivize refineries to invest, petrol producers to invest in SAF, because unfortunately, what is important to remind, which we didn't say in this presentation, the SAF equipment is not the standard fossil, so you cannot use the existing equipment. It requires a specific technology, which is a separate technology. So only there the SAF price will drop significantly below the today levels. That will allow airlines to commit on much bigger fuel. But we are not escaping this debate. We as the industry, and we have talked to many airlines, we are ready to commit and to more consumption of SAF fuel as long as it's available and its price is much closer to the standard fossil fuel than it is today. Michael.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think as Sebastian underlines, this is not a binary option. It's not, or you have mandates, or you ask for investment in production. We need all of this. It's having a bare mandate without the necessary policy support or production facilities being invested in doesn't advance you, but vice versa. You need support coming from both sides, policy support as well as the right level of investment to allow the construction of the SAF production facilities.
We have a couple of questions about a report that came out in Europe yesterday, where I understand it talked about the importance of non-CO2 emissions and contrails in the climate impact of aviation. So the questions basically say, what is IATA doing about these other elements of its climate change impact? And do we have any general comment on the conclusions of the EC study?
I'm happy to take that. We've noted the conclusions of that study. And we're going to explore that with our members. But the point which is noted in the report itself is that the level of knowledge and awareness of the non-CO2 impacts on the climate of aviation's operations are nowhere near the same level as they are for CO2. And so it's very important not to get ahead of the science and the analysis in coming up with either industry action or regulatory action. We have been very ambitious on CO2 because that's the direction that the science and the industry analysis has taken us. That recognizes the level of maturity of knowledge of CO2 impacts. As and when non-CO2 impacts, the level of knowledge gets to the same level, of course, we'll work with industry partners on the appropriate response. So this is an issue we are continuing to monitor, but it's not yet at the same level of maturity to allow us to move ahead with aggressive industry action or indeed asking governments for aggressive regulatory action.
For us, all of the scientific analysis that were used, for example, for CORSIA, we're taking into account all the impact of CO2. So not only the other, as Michael said, the other elements which is linked to azotes and other gases which are produced. It has been taking all of it. So if it becomes a scientific agreement, then probably the definition of the CO2 impact will be changed. So again, if it's a scientifically approved norm, then of course we'll take it into account for the overall action of let's say the negative impact not only of CO2 but the overall impact of using fossil fuels.
Okay. Thank you. We have a question about the use of biofuels. We quoted a figure of something like 300,000 flights have used them. The questioner asked for some examples as to which airlines were involved, what kinds of flying were done, and why aren't there more?
We have 40 airlines today who have some experience of using SAF, but regular operations today are out of LAX with United, as well as some airports in Northern Europe, Amsterdam.
Our host airline is one of the first who used KLM is one of the first who used the blend, and I believe they also tested a full SAF fuel some time ago. We can provide the list of all the 40. I don't remember exactly all of them, but the big international airlines are already testing it.
Okay. So then we have a question that asks about the industry now looking at a pathway to net zero. Is that not behind what a lot of airlines and airline groups are already committing to with their net zero commitments by 2050?
No, it's very. It has to be very clear that we IATA have 292 members, so we are exploring a pathway that we will be able to defend. So it's about what we believe is doable for the whole industry. Please remember that our commitments are concerning all the industry, which is represented by IATA. So we believe that when coming in front of a public opinion and experts with a pathway, we need to have technologies and a credible plan how we can achieve this full decarbonization. For the moment, in 2010, our members committed to reduce it by half, and this is the commitment that was just renewed yesterday, and this is what we stand with as IATA.
A question on SAF fuels. Is there sufficient supply to make SAF in the quantities necessary for aviation to fully decarbonize?
So the answer is yes. There is sufficient supply. The Waypoint report from ATAG is analyzing quite in detail the supply of food crop. I mean, the whole supply of the potential resources needed for SAF, because SAF can be produced from multiple resources, not only food crops. There are even analysis on soap, on waste. I mean, number of things. So we know there is enough supply, but Michael knows the report better, so maybe he will give more detail on that.
Yeah, as Sebastian has noted, there are a number of independently verified assessments which make it clear that there is enough feedstock from sustainable sources, and Sebastian outlined, a number of different feedstocks out there which are meet the sustainability criteria. There is sufficient feedstock that's been verified both through ICAO and through industry analysis. The challenge, as we've said, is to take that feedstock and make it into sustainable aviation fuel at a cost competitive level for the whole sector. But feedstock itself, there is enough out there for us to power the entire fleet.
And it's important to underline that the arrival of SAF will be gradual. So it's not going to be from 1 year to another to 100%. So we will have a pathway where SAF will most likely increase its presence for airlines. So both the supply will grow on each side. So it's going to be a gradual arrival to a much bigger percentage of users. Therefore, we will also have time to explore and to adapt the supply for refineries to produce SAF. It's going to be a long-lasting process.
The industry, and you quoted it in your presentation, Sebastian, uses the 1.9 or 2% figure quite often in relation to other industries. But that's double the size of countries like Canada or France or South Korea in terms of their contributions as countries. So what is aviation trying to say when they quote the 2% figure?
Well, we are trying to say that we are looking at the industry at a global level. Obviously, the level of contribution of CO2 emissions is completely uneven, and it's very closely linked not only to the economic development, but also to the size of territories. You can quote Singapore, which has zero domestic flights, so therefore zero domestic emission of CO2, but a huge contribution to international traffic. While if you take, by the way, Canada, it has a huge territory, so therefore the CO2 emissions on any high level of GDP development. So there is a lot of people traveling. Of course, there is the question of uneven development. If you take studies who shows that an average American citizen has 360 kilograms per year of CO2 emission, while an average Rwandese has 0.14, which is the lowest. So we have full conscience of this geographical discrepancies. By the way, there are many people who still don't have access to air transport, so they don't contribute at all. So therefore, what we are trying to say is that the same logic applies to car industry, which is developed or not, truck, shipping industry. We are looking at our contribution because of the so global world from a perspective of the all industry. So 1.9 reflects all the cargo and all the CO2 emissions worldwide from all the airlines. And this is what counts, because we will not apply this measure per continent, because then we will already be achieving our targets. If we take, for example, African continent, and then we would overachieve this target in Northern America. Therefore, the biggest sense it makes is to take a global approach and to look at our industry as whole and take this commitment as a whole.
Okay. I have a question that says, explain why another offset program isn't just a delaying tactic for not addressing the real problem and setting a firm timetable for getting to net zero. Perhaps that's a misinterpretation of what the carbon exchange is, but I'll throw that over to...
Yeah, but okay, so we can explain again, maybe we're not clear again, but first of all, we today, and this is what I was mentioning at the challenges, we do not have any technology available that will allow a zero set emission. It simply doesn't exist. Even the sustainable aviation fuel reduces by 80% the CO2 impact, but still there is an impact. And this is what I was mentioning about the difference with available technologies, with road transport and energy technologies, or electric car, and we can just scale it. We do not have any technology to have a zero net emission plane available today, because nor airplane producers nor engine producers do not have it. So the way we can proceed is to invest in all technologies that will allow us to go there. SAF is one of them, but as you heard, some of the OEMs, aircraft producers, they're also investing in hybrid plane, in hydrogen planes, in all type of planes that will reduce it. That's number one. But in the meantime, we have a system. We recognize that we emit CO2. Again, at the scale of the world is 2%. But despite this figure being so low, we decided to create this carbon exchange to immediately offset. So to invest, to allow projects which are certified to obtain financial support to develop. So it's a way of compensating the fact that we do not have these technologies available, but we recognize it. So we allow those projects to be available in a almost financial platform where projects can be presented, priced, and airlines can offset the consumption that they estimate useful, or the project they can support. So it's not a way of delaying, because it does not delay any way our ambitions, so it doesn't delay our commitments. It just implements immediately a way of compensating. So actually, it's exactly the opposite. It's not delaying. It's speeding up the contribution of aviation to CO2.
Yeah, and in terms of timelines, we do have a timeline. We have a very clear commitment, and now a pathway out to 2050. Our members confirmed that yesterday with the AGM resolution, as Sebastian mentioned. So there is a very clear timeline, but there's a recognition, and this has always been the view of the industry, a recognition that there is the need for some form of economic regulation through offsetting for a defined period of time. In the case of aviation through CORSIA, it's out to 2035, a defined period of time where we will offset emissions in order to stabilize them at a certain level, whilst the technology and SAF developments come online. So we have a very clear timeline in view, and I'd say that we're one of the few, if not the only, global industry to have such a timeline in place.
Okay. We have a question asking about previous comments. Sebastian, you made a comment that SAF won't be adopted suddenly. Yet previously, IATA and airlines have suggested several major boosts in usage of SAF as new plants come online. So are we now not expecting to see some of those jumps coming online in the near future?
We're essentially what we're going from today is 0.01% of total fuel supply coming from SAF, and by 2050 we need to have SAF supply representing anything from 50 to 85%. So it's clearly going to be a gradual ramp up. We think that by the middle of this decade, we could have around 2% of fuel supply coming from SAF. And so if you follow that curve, it will be, we believe, a constant uptick towards the levels of supply from SAF in 2050. So in no way are we stepping back from any of our previous calls to action on SAF. We're simply recognizing that this will be a gradual ramp up.
And then we're just about out of time. So just one last maybe wrap-up question. In the resolution, IATA said it will be exploring pathways to net zero. Aside from SAF and offsetting, what other elements are included or could be included in that pathway?
So definitely the technology progress of propulsion systems. This is something we don't know today. There is the announcement by 2035, for example, by Airbus of a hydrogen plane. We know that there are projects by other producers of hybrid planes. So this part is a part where we need technology progress and a technology jump, if I may say so, by aircraft producers and engine producers. This is what we count on.
And let's never forget the significant role we can always get from operational improvements, the way the airlines are flying their aircraft, and improvements in infrastructure through projects like Single European Sky, Next Gen. There is still some major emissions reductions to be achieved through those, but the real progress is going to come through technology, as Sebastian said.
Great. With that, I make it 2:45 here in Geneva, so we'll bring this briefing to an end.